Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of Critical Weight Theory. So, now I'm going to talk about the exciting topic of balancing work, life, and family in a lean and mean world. Now, we have all at some point probably seen headlines like Working Mothers Still Face Special Challenges, or a similarly worded headline. And sure enough, there are valid interests and concerns in those headlines and those stories, and I'm not trying to lose sight of that. At the same time, my radical alarm has to keep ringing, and it says, well, okay, what are some of those special challenges that working mothers face, and how many of them are 100% necessary or inherent, and how many of them are conditional? So, a very important question. When I look at society and its issues, I often ask that, how many things are conditional, how many things are actually inherent. And when I look at solutions to a given topic, I ask a very similar question. I phrase things in a certain way, I frame them in a certain way. I say, if we want to do this, then it should be done that way, in a certain conditional way. So, what some of those challenges are includes paying bills to some capitalist overlords who dominate land, property, money, resources, and decision making. All right, there it is. I said it once again, talking about the very basic nature of how the economy and society function. You are not just born into a job 100% naturally. We don't just have McDonald's sprout out from the soil, naturally. They're conditional. They are businesses that people, in a way, have culturally grown over time. They are conditional. You get these special challenges in life in a society like ours because in a way you are trained into them, and in a lot of cases and in a lot of ways possibly choked off from other options. And by you I don't necessarily mean you, but people in general. I'm generalizing here. I'm talking about people overall who may or may not be like you specifically, but who probably are in some key respects. You know, at the end of the day, I think most people have things in common. They breathe oxygen, they have thoughts in their brains. It's really a matter of what exactly they are trained into thinking by their life experiences, by the surrounding culture, and a little bit by their own quirks. And still, in the context of a capitalist country and a capitalist global economy, it does indeed make sense to adapt to these special challenges. So, I'm not just mocking people for behaving in a certain way in a certain culture, because to some extent, well, I do as well. I interact with all of these different businesses and different environments and cultural expectations, because you probably have to head out and do a goddamn job. If you were a parent, there might be a 100% practical desire to have things like preschool education and daycare, so your kids have something to do other than stay at home and veg out in front of the TV, or possibly rot away while mommy and or daddy or some other parental guardian figure is off trying to pay the bills. You also don't want your kids to get into trouble necessarily. So that's why there's a demand for things like preschool and daycare and school in general. So there's a bit of a babysitter. And of course, you'll want the schools and the daycares to be of a certain quality to provide a sense of a home away from home, so the kids aren't totally miserable. And again, this isn't just some vision of a paradise on earth. This is some practical, down to earth type of shit that I'm talking about. And, soon enough, it seems like this stuff could be taken for granted if we're, smart enough. But right now, it seems like there's some who want to take these options away. You may want your kids to be taken care of by the same culture and society that demands you head out to work, maybe for 40 plus hours a week. Well, not so fast. You'll, of course, find some Republicans tweeting things like, universal daycare is class war against normal people. So that was a real tweet, or excretion as it might be called now, as Twitter is now called X by uncool people. But anyway, that tweet about universal daycare being quote unquote class war against normal people was by Republican dipshit J.D. Vance, who elaborated as if that would actually make it better. Anyway, he said, normal Americans care more about their families than their jobs and want a family policy that doesn't shunt their kids into crap daycare so they can enjoy more quote unquote freedom in the paid labor force. Well, JD, according to Republican talking points themselves, Americans are supposed to work because they care about their families. It's Republicans who, for generations and generations now, have actually talked about the freedom of the paid labor force. After all, aren't these the same dipshits who, year after year after year, say it's the lazy Democrat liberals who hate freedom and who hate hard work? So it seems like a little bit of JD flipping the script, turning things around, being a little bit contradictory in many ways. So, in other words, these people want to yank away quality daycare, at least for families who are not well off, with the not so hidden message that women don't belong in the workforce. Ya dumb bitches just need to stay at home and act like a birthing machine for the Christian male utopia, while the J.D. Vances of the world collect taxpayer money as politicians or as corporations that receive subsidies, and they get clout for turning the clock back to the days where women couldn't own property, perhaps, or maybe were even suspected of witchcraft, or maybe they were considered property. And if you don't think witchcraft is a possibility as something women could be accused of, just ask conservative lunatics like Pastor Greg Locke or the neo-Nazi Nick Fuentes, two figures who have made it pretty clear in various ways that they at least entertain the idea that certain women are witches. And by the way, year after year, Democrats fail to note that, this sort of religious lunacy is piling up, even as Republican politicians rake in taxpayer dollars as a matter of course, and they rail against government services. They talk about Democrats failing at messaging, and that's true, and that's partly why we're in this embarrassing tailspin back in time to begin with. But at the same time, whenever the Democratic Party does have more progressive messaging, they're acting as if they're anti-family or something. So it's like you just can't win. You just can't win. So I think we may be at a time where things are possibly changing around because things are just so chaotic right now. But it's really hard to get the messaging correctly when there's so many different people out there who are screwing things up and taking things out of context, and they're having convoluted expectations and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, people like Sarah Huckabee Sanders are collectively and actively rolling back restrictions on child labor because we obviously can't have daycare, but we can have some kids work dangerous jobs for low pay and no benefits. No good at math? No problem, little Johnny or Janie. Grab this pickaxe and get black lung in this unregulated mining operation instead. And if you go on strike, you'll either be replaced by another more obedient little piece of shit, or maybe a machine, or maybe some cops or private guards will pay a little visit with a billy club until you see things the right way because of freedom and whatnot. You know, you don't want to have organized labor because that's that's when things get too bad for the businesses, for the almighty dollar, and you have to set the record straight with a threat of beating people up, shooting at them, throwing them in a jail cell, etc. So what's wrong with this picture? You know, that actually is what labor history actually looks like if you were to look at it. And in fact, there's some of that going on today, where if you have some critiques of businesses, or maybe if your protest gets a little bit too rowdy, then you're nothing but a villain. Your interests and concerns are nothing but a joke, and you're considered a threat or whatever, and you're dealt with accordingly by these, whatever you want to call them. I guess in today's day and world, it'd be technocrats. Meanwhile, liberals will write things like, you know, there are currently 56,000 fewer female executives than there were in 1997, according to a Harvard Business Review article. Well, personally, I would be fine with zero executives in a fully democratized economy, in an economy that functions sort of like a giant co-op full of co-ops. Maybe not perfect, but it's an idea. So yes, it would be nice to have more, women in power from a certain perspective. But I also like the idea of just having a more democratically run workforce, workplace environment. Some of the barriers to advancement and increased employment among women are especially impactful for mothers, no doubt about it. So we have an AmericanProgress.org article titled "The Childcare Crisis is Keeping Women Out of the Workforce," and that is true. And apparently, that's what J.D. Vance and his beard that he grew to hide his chubbiness want. And that can be true, that childcare, the lack thereof, is keeping women out of the workforce. But again, that fundamental question should be, whose workforce is it anyway? Most articles will not even acknowledge the existence of individuals or families with less than $10,000 in annual income. Like if you watch a lot of sitcoms or something, they tend to have, you know, middle class families or upper middle class families, or in some cases just plain rich families. Um, which is why I kind of like the original Roseanne sitcom, because it kind of hinted at the life of a poorer family, a more, you know, relatable family environment, where they would sometimes wonder, how am I going to pay these bills? Or who's going to watch the kids? And all that kind of stuff. They had some real issues that people could relate to on that show. And sure enough, it's a very serious issue, but one that could perhaps be dealt with better, again, in a more democratized economy that functioned more like a co-op full of co-ops. And they'll, you know what they'll never do, these oligarch types, they'll never promote a scenario where someone can still comfortably earn so little as like as possible and be happy either. They'll see that as being weird, right? But to me, that just makes sense. Isn't that the actual sort of dream, that you have enough free time to do what you want and pursue your interests and not have to, you know, be somebody's bitch in order to have a good life and a good time, you know? So I myself have had plenty of years where I earned a puny amount of money, and whether it was my fault or not, or whether it was something that I could be mocked over, it was partly because I recognized the futility of the rat race. I knew people who made considerably more than I did, yet didn't look any better off than myself, really, because they had bills upon bills, obligations upon obligations, and even though they tried to look happy in some cases, you could tell the strain was there, at least in most circumstances. You could tell that. They just were not as happy as they would like to be. And in some cases, that's because of the system in general, right? Right? It's not necessarily just a personal failing. It's just because they didn't have the time to pursue some of their dreams, some of their expectations, their aspirations. Their perhaps creative and artistic endeavors that they maybe wanted to try at some time. Life steered them down a different avenue. So even though, yes, at times being broke definitely put me under duress and still could, I know what it's like to work 40 hours a week or more. And when I did that, it was shocking how little difference it made from times where I worked 20-hour weeks, or maybe even as low as 12-hour weeks. So, this idea that if you work so hard and you work full time or more than full time, you're some kind of superior race or something. Like, can we just do away with that already? Like, you're not necessarily the greatest person, the greatest thing since sliced bread. And a person who works a scant amount of hours, they're not necessarily a villain. Can we finally culturally move past that crap and just accept that a, a person is a person, and not exaggerate like how much of a miserable failure they are just because they're not working as many hours or whatever as somebody else. I do appreciate having a job. I appreciate working, a certain amount of hours. I actually do have work ethic. I try to do a good job. And, I like that I can get raises and whatnot. But at the end of the day, if my situation changed, I wouldn't necessarily beat myself up over it, because that's not the sole factor at play here. The economy could go south. It could throw me out of work. I could get laid off. I could be unfairly fired. The place I work for could go out of business. Or maybe I could just find a different career path. That there are all sorts of different things that could happen. Maybe I could just quit. You know, it's it's one of those things. There's basically infinite things that could happen, and I think we just need to cut through some of the bull crap. It's all bullshit to a larger degree, and I think everyone knows it. You know what I mean? That's why JD Vance can be so convoluted and not give a fuck, because I think he knows as well as anyone that the system is actually bizarre, and there's no real way to make heads or tails of some of its stark contradictions, at least without casting a net and capturing some of its bullcrap and repackaging it yourself in the best way that you can, where you can maybe make sense of some of it. So it actually isn't all bad. I don't want to make it all seem like everything is rotten, especially not for everyone's simultaneously. But plenty of it just does not withstand scrutiny the way we are told it withstands scrutiny. There will be plenty of scenarios where you're more likely to change jobs or leave the workforce, and you'll favor one way of creating a primary income over others. But we're all in this muck, and it gets thicker when we lack even a semblance of control over it anymore. And that seems to be the chaotic situation that society in general is heading toward. Parents are bogged down without parental leave policies, and we know this wouldn't even be a problem if these parents were considered a direct part of workplace management. There would likely be practically no debate anywhere over parental leave because the parents would already recognize that, yes, being able to spend time with families is every bit as important as work. Hell, it's probably more important for most people, right? But J.D. Vance, the misogynistic prick, who has also argued against no fault divorce, which would leave women trapped in loveless, potentially abusive marriages, does not care about parents overall being able to take care of their kids. He wants women to be pigeonholed into that role because that is what his nut job theocratic backers want. So stay at home mom or else. More countries are starting to recognize the challenges of balancing work and family life, and honest people will know that your level of stress in regard to doing that is about the stressful nature of anti democratic approaches to work. The solution isn't to have a legally mandated 60-hour work week for mothers as well as laws regarding parental leave. It's simpler than that. Workplace democracy, workers as owners. That way, this debate would pretty much not even occur in the first place. Don't get me wrong, having those laws make sense under the status quo, but also let's move past that status quo to the extent possible ASAP. More workplace democracy, please. Again, these policies offer mothers more flexibility in their working environments, as well as the chance to take more time off, which is great. But to what extent would it even be a policy rather than simply common sense in an environment where workers themselves dominated the economy? It wouldn't just be policy, but how things are, pretty much as the natural order of things. So, how about that? And is that really utopian or just something that rich pricks are selling as impossible? They'd claim that your say in your working life is a utopian, radical extremist vision. You'd have to be some raving Marxist lunatic or something, but you don't have to believe that hype. Some countries like Sweden and Finland are known for increased agreements or compromises that balance employee and employer interest regarding parents' work family tensions. And I'm pretty sure they rate higher on the happiness index. So there, JD and your stupid beard. Then again, I gotta admit, kids working in mines tend to look kind of badass. If you look at some of those old timey photos, they live hard and possibly die young, and that sounds like a pretty badass tattoo on a biker's arm. So, if you want to be macho, you can take us down that path, but I'm not so much into looking macho for no good reason. I'd rather life be comfortable and safe.